Asia Pacific, of course, has dominated the aviation market globally pre-pandemic. But this year, we're going to see perhaps a tidal change here because we're expecting that Asia Pacific will be coming in second to Europe because of what we're seeing with the slower recovery in the aviation market as well as China's closed borders. Alex, I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously, we talked earlier, we're saying how Asia is now about 50% of where it was pre-pandemic. Southeast Asia, I think, is doing better, but give us the overall outlook for APEC in terms of aviation. What are we looking at?
Well, we are looking at recovery. We're probably overall in Asia looking at 2023, 2024, maybe later. It all depends on China because Asia is so dominated by China. We've got to remember that Japan and Taiwan also just opened up within weeks of today, and it's really key. But if you look at Southeast Asia, and that's what I'm responsible for, so that's what I can talk to more readily. You know, we're at 70% recovery from 2019 levels. So Southeast Asia is booming, partially because of almost all the countries are open except for maybe Myanmar or other places that maybe we're not rushing to go to. But you know, I was just in Cambodia at the ASEAN Summit. I went to Bali to go to the G20 and B20. And my planes were packed all directions, not only with people going obviously to those summits, but also with tourists.
That's right. And I noticed the business lounges. I mean, they're packed as well.
They are almost overpacked, and you know that's one of the challenges that we see is that you know the airports and the airlines are struggling to meet the demand that is out there. So the demand is pent up; it's there. But you know, a lot of the airport lounges aren't fully open, and you know we see lounges that are more packed than ever, and you see you know fewer flights. And we talked about price in the last panel, you know, and that's an example of you know demand outstripping supply. And unfortunately, a lot of the airlines let staff go, but they also put their aircraft into mothballs, and it takes a little while to bring those aircraft back. They're not meant to sit for any length of time, let alone years. So we've got some challenges in front of us, but I'm confident that this region can meet those challenges.
And of course, despite those challenges, still lots of upside, especially here in Asia. I mean, tell us a little bit about the factors, you know, the growth factors that's really driving the growth that we're seeing here in Southeast Asia.
Well, again, since we're sitting here in Thailand, I really want to look at Southeast Asia. You know, we've got a market of 660 million people, mostly young. The median age is just over 30 years old. The majority of people in this region are under 35. In fact, 380 million people reside here in ASEAN. And you know, we throw out these numbers all the time, but 380 million people means that you have a young population here in this region that's 20% larger than the entire population of the United States. So you've got this incredible growth factor. We've got open markets, open skies here in ASEAN, and domestic travel is coming back first, as you probably know, but intra-ASEAN, intra-Asia travel is the next to come, and the long-haul international is the slowest to recover at the moment. But you know, those young people will drive engagement, and you got to remember that Southeast Asia sits next to the first and second largest populations in the world. So when China comes back online, you're going to see this region very quickly rebound and very quickly come back and surpass 2019 numbers.
What's really surprising to me, certainly when you travel through Southeast Asia, you happen to talk to a passenger, you see passengers who obviously are traveling for the very first time, and we still see so many of that throughout the region.
We do, and you know, I got to hand it to the governments of Southeast Asia and ASEAN as an entity has really opened up the possibility for low-cost airlines to develop and to thrive. And you've seen many examples from you know, Vietjet in Vietnam to Scoot in Singapore, and quite a number here in Thailand, Smile and others, really servicing a market that couldn't, by price, is price sensitive, but also wants to travel and hasn't traveled before. And it's really exciting to see. And even, you know, now when I travel from Singapore, a lot of times I can't get on Singapore Airlines because they're oversold, and I have to I use Scoot, and it's a very different experience, but it's a great experience, and the Scoot flights are completely full as well. So it's incredible.
That's great. We talked about bright spots. Let's talk to some of the challenges. You mentioned, for example, capacity and just not getting enough flights, not getting enough planes up in the air right now because they're mothballed. We obviously have a problem with workforce as well. I mean, we experienced a pandemic, flights were shuttered, no one could travel, so you had to lay off staff, you had to lay off pilots, you had to lay off airline attendants and airport staff. Where are we now in terms of workforce, and how do we start to get those people back?
Well, we're still struggling, and the airlines of the region were in need of more staff even in 2019. We've got a huge demand for pilots, for technicians, and for flight attendants. A lot of them, as you said, were furloughed or laid off and went and found other ways to support themselves. And a lot of them are very happy in those other ways. They're not traveling, they're not working crazy hours and being stressed, so they're not necessarily coming back now that the demand is there. So that's a double problem. One, you don't have your skilled and experienced staff coming back, but secondly, you have to train everybody, and you can't train everybody on a dime. So, we've got flight schools and others that are training pilots, but it's not like you can, put someone in today and get them out tomorrow. So it's going to be a challenge for the region for a little while to come. In addition to, supply chains are also challenged in terms of OEMs like ourselves.
Yeah.
So we're not producing as quickly as we would like to in terms of our plans.
How in terms of that production, what do we need to get that back up, and how
Well, it's
delayed
coming
are
back,
we?
but everybody is struggling with labor and the supply chain. So I think it's coming back, and assuming that we can keep the momentum and that the recession doesn't slow us down some more, I think it'll be back somewhat quickly. But we're learning about supply chains and redundancy and a few other things. So.
One of the things you mentioned, of course, is with a workforce is pilots as well. We are experiencing a pilot shortage across the globe. There is now talk, and I think support from plane makers as well as the regulators to try to tease out the feasibility of having just one pilot in the cockpit rather than two. And during the break, we also mentioned about autonomous flights
Yep.
as well, which is, interesting prospect. I mean, obviously, it'll save the airlines lots of money, but at the same time, customers and passengers, I mean, there's some resistance to that. Now, I'm wondering how Boeing...
the psychological barriers are probably harder than the technological barriers. Boeing is an investor in a company called Whisk, which is developing autonomous air taxis to take people initially from airports to city centers. I think we're on version 6 now. And I've seen it fly myself, an earlier version. It's pretty incredible. But it's hard to imagine for some people to get into a flying machine that doesn't have a pilot and doesn't, and takes off and lands by itself. So I think psychologically it's going to be harder. The technology is there. Obviously, there's a lot of things we'll have to work through with regulators and flight routes and making sure that drones and other things don't get in the way of passenger moving autonomous vehicles. But the technology is there for single pilots. Again, it's really about where the regulators and the general public feel comfortable.
Do you think that single pilot as well as autonomous are going to be developed concurrently, or do you think first we'll start with one pilot, in the cockpit, get people used to that idea, and then autonomous?
I think, obviously I can't predict the future, but at Boeing we're working on both concurrently, and we'll see different things. I think for maybe a small 4 or 6 person air taxi, maybe we start with autonomous. Although a lot of people are working on similar versions with a pilot. And for larger airplanes, I think it might take a little while before we're ready to put 100 plus people on an airplane and send them with an autonomous pilot, or even a single pilot. So.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly seeing capsules, boost people into outer space all autonomously.
We had
right?
a great Artemis launch today. So we've got a rocket that's going around the moon as we speak. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of that, and that's where we're going. That's where we're headed. But again, we're all used to having pilots. We're all used to seeing a person. To the last moderator's point, it's nice to be greeted by an actual person. So we'll see where it goes, but that'll be up to our customers and our friends. But Boeing is taking the technology and getting it ready for when the public and the regulators are ready to accept it.
Great. I know obviously the industry has some very important goals when it comes to sustainability. And the aviation industry has pledged that it wants to be carbon neutral. Yes, exactly. Carbon neutral, zero emissions by 2050. So how do we get there? Because there's certainly a lot of concern that sustainable jet fuel, we're not quite there yet with production numbers. How do we get around that?
Well, we have to do it together. Obviously, if we're going to get there, it's got to be everybody involved, and governments have a role, and the manufacturers have a role, and certainly the airlines have a role. But at Boeing, when we look at it, and we're trying to be a catalyst for this change, we look at it in four aspects. First and foremost, fleet renewal. I mean, we think that our modern airplanes are somewhere between 15 and 25% more fuel efficient than the models that they're replacing. The second is operational efficiency. We've got technology using big data and AI to help airports and airlines and the pilots fly more efficiently and just use the fuel that they're using in a way that is very specific to where they want to go. And I think that's really important. And of course, the big opportunity in the room is sustainable aviation fuel or renewable energies. It may not only be sustainable aviation fuel at Boeing. We say it's SAF and, not SAF or. But that's really the opportunity. If you use 100% sustainable aviation fuel to power your airplanes, and that can be done today, we've shown that through real flights, that would save us about 80% of carbon emissions. So that's really significant. The problem with SAF is there's not enough of it in the world. There are not enough refineries, and we haven't really dedicated the feedstock to make it happen. And it's a biofuel, and the feedstock in Asia, in Southeast Asia especially, is here and plentiful. But we need to work with governments to make it effective and to bring down the price. Because right now, one of the barriers is that there's not enough supply, so and there is demand. Everything that's supplied is used, but the price is way too high, even above today's higher prices for Jet A fuel. It's still significantly double-digit percentages higher than Jet A fuel. So we'll have to work with governments to incentivize both the airlines and the producers to make SAF, and we'll have to work with the energy companies to try and ensure that the SAF that's produced here in Asia gets to the airports, and that you need airports to make sure the infrastructure is there. At Boeing, we've said that we will make sure that all of our planes are 100% SAF compatible by 2030, which is a really important thing. We can fly right now, but we're making sure that the hoses and the infrastructure around the hoses are sustainable and compatible with both Jet A and SAF being put in and out of planes. And many operators in Europe and in California are starting to use a blend of SAF. It's usually pretty small, under 5%, to power their planes, and that's been done by regulation.
Well, that is good news. I mean, 2050 at the same time seems like it's way off, but we know that we'll be right there. And there is concern whether or not we're hitting at least the goalposts. What is your sense of where we are in terms of 2050 and where we are now?
Well, I think we have some ways to go. I'm not an expert in sustainability, but the issue around SAF is one of the key ones, right? So 15 to 25% savings on fleet renewal, 10% on operational efficiency help, but it's the 80% when we get to 100% SAF that really makes a difference. And 100% SAF is significantly off. 2050 is far enough that I think we'll hit it, but it's going to take a lot to get there, and we're going to have to work with industry and governments to get us there.
What about the role of consumers? I mean, obviously we saw in that polling, people, when they travel, they really want to, they're so price sensitive, they want to pay as little as possible. I mean, are consumers willing, are they going to be willing to pay?
Well, that's a $20,000 question. Hopefully we can bring SAF prices down by increasing the supply to meet the demand to a price point that's compatible and acceptable to the consumers. But I think there are a group of consumers, certainly the business travelers, that may be willing to pay more if they can get things like carbon offset for their travel and a higher priced ticket. So we'll have to see on that, and that's up to our airline partners. But but you know, we've got to get the fuel availability up first.
Great. We've just emerged from the pandemic, and now, of course, ahead we're bracing most of our markets for economic times that are going to be turbulent again. What's your outlook for aviation during this very difficult time, and especially for Boeing and Boeing's growth in the region?
Well, in Southeast Asia, we're very optimistic. In Asia as a whole, we're optimistic. You know, obviously a lot on Asia depends on China's opening. You know, a risk of recession, a risk of economic downturn certainly hurts our airline partners, and therefore, you know, is challenging for others as well. But, you know, we're optimistic. This region, as I said, has the first, second, third largest populations in the world. And that's good, and they're young populations, and they want to travel. We've seen that prior to 2019. We're hopeful, and you know, the G20, we're hopeful that the governments don't forget about the pandemic, do something to make sure that, you know, everyone says it's when, not if, but hopefully it's when, a long time from now, the next pandemic hits us, we'll be prepared and we'll be coordinated. One of the biggest challenges to travel is that every government in the world had a different policy, whether it was, you know, what you had to do to before you came, after you came, or, you know, what app you had to download. I think I have like 15 different apps for 10 countries in Southeast Asia, and maybe that's an exaggeration, but you know, it is challenging. So we want to see governments coordinate, and that's what hopefully will come out of today's meetings at the G20.
Great. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much, Alex Feldman.
Thank you.